Hey y'all, welcome to Brianna Approved, a podcast for people who like a holistic approach to real science and clinical research on all things nutrition, botanicals, and balance. I'm your host, Brianna DiOrio, clinical nutritionist, herbal practitioner, and recovering super spaz. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Brianna Approved podcast. We are on episode 8, and we are going to get into adaptogens today because I think it is fitting. We have been in a global pandemic for a year. People's mental health and emotional well-being is teetering, and adaptogens are really great for emotional well-being, emotional support, stress support. So this episode, of course, we'll start with fun facts, but then we are going to do the main segment of the show on adaptogens and kind of their mechanism of action. I don't want to get too much into stress and the conversation of that today because that can be a whole episode on its own, and it will. The majority of this show is going to be Botanical Bri. So we're going to talk about some particular adaptogens such as Ashwagandha, holy basil, Eleuthero, and Rhodiola, and then we will finish out the show with our nerd alert on Withanolides. And now it's time for your fun fact of the day while I sip cafe. Research from Harvard that looked at almost 30,000 participants found that reframing stress as helpful rather than harmful can improve performance and reverse the physiological changes brought about by stress. So that's really cool because we know that stress is there to help us to survive. It's not meant to harm us. We have gotten into this mindset that all stress is bad and we want to totally evade it. And that's definitely not the goal. We need to work on reframing stress, having stress resilience, and, controlling what we can control. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole of that and go on a whole philosophical rant because I definitely could. However, just know that there's actual research that shows if we reframe our thoughts about stress and our perception of stress, our body can react differently from a physiological point of view. So you don't have to always necessarily know how to navigate all stressful situations in your life, but I will remind you that all emotions are transient, and sometimes we have to just learn to surf the wave that we're currently on. So that's all I'm going to say about stress today, because now we're going to move into knowledge bites, your brain's favorite food. We are going to do knowledge bites today on adaptogens and understanding what they are, how they work, and we're going to discuss a few different kinds of adaptogens that might be beneficial for your individual constitutional type. So interestingly enough, adaptogens are a lot of the times plants that have actually grown in very stressful conditions themselves. So this is what actually makes them, really powerful and gives them their strength and their ability to adapt into these harsh climates. For example, maca grows in really harsh climates and at very, very high altitudes, where something like rhodiola can flourish in some more of these mountainous climates like Asia. But before we get into, different kinds of adaptogens, let's talk about what adaptogens actually are. So these are substances that enhance the state of non-specific resistance in stress. So I kind of call this like mom mode, right? Mama bear mode. If your mom is like trying to protect you and she's upset about something, she doesn't necessarily care like what the main issue was or what the root cause was. She just wants to fix things. And that's kind of how adaptogens work. They non-specifically go throughout the body and just are trying to get you back into balance and get you back into a homeostatic state, right? Because that's kind of what our body always wants. We have this swinging pendulum, if you will, with things like, stress and inflammation and even, our immune system, where we don't want things to be hyper and excess. And we also don't want things to be hypo and deficient. We want to kind of have balance and understanding that our health, of course, is dynamic and it can change on a day-to-day basis. And the dose makes the poison. I cannot stress that enough for everybody listening. So adaptogens are basically these innocuous agents which non-specifically increase resistance against physical, chemical, biological, psychological stressors. So all the different kinds of stresses that can fill up our stress bucket, and they have a normalizing effect independent of the nature of our pathological state. So regardless whether it is, again, a chemical stress, a biological stress, a thought we're thinking, maybe we have an infection internally, maybe we're super run down, these adaptogens kind of work non-specifically of just trying and going to repair things. They're kind of like the pit crew of your body, if you will. So there's this really unique class of healing plants where they really focus on balance and restoring and protecting the body. And what's important to understand about adaptogens is that these are generally tonics, meaning you are going to be in such a long-term committed relationship with adaptogens that you might as well get a marriage certificate because they don't work overnight. And again, many times when we are in a place of dis-ease, our body is not in harmony, we've gotten so run down, that didn't take 1 month or 2 months or even 3 months. So you're certainly not going to undo that in 1, 2, 3 months, right? So adaptogens, you have to give time to work with your body. These are medicinal plants. We're not competing with pharmaceuticals, and you have to meet yourself where you are of how much of a hole have you dug and how long is it going to take you out of that? And I'm not saying that in a sense to get you frustrated about, wanting to fix something overnight, but you do have to give time some time. And while you're doing that, you can work on other areas of your life, because I will preface the rest of this show by saying you cannot adaptogen your way out of a poor lifestyle, out of not sleeping enough, out of ignoring your diet. Adaptogens are the icing on the cake of a healthy lifestyle, and you need to remember that. So these adaptogens don't necessarily have a specific action, again, in the body. They help you respond to any influence or stressor, and they have, again, this normalizing effect on all these different physiological functions that happen in your body. And, a lot of herbalists and practitioners will talk about the use of adaptogens in their role to promote optimal physiological responses to both internal and external stressors. Again, they help you adapt to what's going on. So they are like your homie for life, where they give you a pep talk and they're like, listen, you got a lot going on right now. I'm here for you. Like, this is going to help you feel more relaxed. But we will also talk about that sometimes we want adaptogens that are going to be more stimulating, and sometimes we want some that are more calming. So some are sedative and some are going to help rev you up. And this is where it's very important to understand where you fall on the spectrum of what you need. And again, these are tonics, meaning that you have to take them for a super long time. You have to take them for multiple dosages throughout the day, right? So we're titrating up frequently. And sometimes you might need to take a combination of them. A lot of Chinese formulas you'll see have many different herbs in there. So a lot of the times with these adaptogens, we're not taking just one. We might be taking multiple adaptogens at once, and you can kind of exchange them in and out as you need. But first you need to ask yourself, how long have I been in this place mentally, emotionally, physically, physiologically? What was going on before my body started to kind of break down? And again, let's not get mad at our body for giving us symptoms like being tired or having our hair fall out or not recovering from the gym or whatever your symptom is, because that is how your body talks to you. That is your body's language. So we have to listen to that as opposed to just continuing to put a Band-Aid approach on what's going on with our health. Something that is really cool about adaptogens that's maybe a little less hippy-dippy and more sciencey is that they actually can influence something called stress and heat shock proteins. So a lot of people who talk about the benefits of heat shock proteins and these things are people who do saunas. You can also increase this from, infrared lights and even things like working out. But heat shock proteins, what they do is that they kind of act as like these molecular chaperones, right? And they help to fold and synthesize proteins. So they can regulate how our proteins essentially fold up and how they function. So this is why adaptogens can have a really important role on things like gene expression and what enzymes get expressed and turned on and turned off, and even what's going on from a neurological standpoint, because we do know that a lot of our, different proteins in our body can influence what's going on with our neuroscience. I also like to remind people that mushrooms many times can fall into this class of adaptogen botanicals that is going to help increase your body's resistance, again, to physical stress, to chemical stress, biological stress, and again, bringing about balance and homeostasis to the body. So again, physical stress can be things like you're just really hard on your body. You never take a day off from the gym, and no amount of maca is going to really help that. You need to take a rest day. You need to go to sleep. Chemical stress could be, you have stuff going on, internally where your cells maybe are, having a really high oxidative turnover rate. Maybe you've been exposed to pathogens recently, and then biological stressors as well. So we need to, again, figure out what kind of stress it is. But we do know on some level that stress is pretty much stress to the body, and it kind of responds all the same. There are some different nuances. I think we have gotten way oversimplified with that concept about how your body responds to stress, again, because it's not all bad, but we do want to figure out what's going on with our stress bucket. And again, these adaptogens produce this non-specific response in the body, right? And they have a normalizing effect. So they're not going to be like an immune quote booster. They're not going to, give you a quick jolt of energy, like something that's going to be like a cup of coffee. They're not super sedative in nature, like something like hops or valerian, where it's going to really make you tired. Again, they have a normalizing, balancing effect. They're like your super chill friend who's just like, yeah, man, we'll figure it out. They don't get super stressed about stuff. They don't get super excitable. They're kind of there to chill you out. And you feel like better being around that person. That's kind of what adaptogens do in your body. What they can also do is they can prolong the phase of resistance to some of these stimulatory effects. They can, again, regulate some of these heat shock proteins. They can help to produce ATP, which is going to give us energy, right? And then there's even some cool research on their ability to produce things like nitric oxide and beta endorphins, right? So things that can help to relax the blood vessels and to actually make us feel good and interact with some of these receptors in our brain for things like cortisol and the stress response as well. Now, again, because we have biochemical individuality or our constitutional type, or if you want to get into Ayurveda, depending on what your dosha is, right? We all respond differently to different things. And this is why some adaptogens work really great on certain kinds of people, and sometimes it can make the problem worse, or maybe there's no benefit or effect at all. If you're a super type A, super spaz person, you likely are tired because you're running on adrenaline. So you might not actually need something that's going to give you more energy. You might need something that's more balancing in nature and that's going to actually help to calm you down a little bit, right? So you have to meet yourself where you are, and you have to be honest about it and figure out, what do I need more of? Do I need something that is a bit more stimulating? Do I need something that's more calming? Do I need something that's maybe just more balancing? And then again, figuring out how long you've dug this hole for yourself, that it's going to probably take a lot longer than that to get out of it as well. I also like to remind people that I think it's important to figure out what kind of stress person you are. How do you respond to stress? I'm the kind of person that when I am very stressed out, and again, stress can mean a lot of things. It can mean not getting enough sleep. It could mean not getting enough of the right nutrients. It can be traveling a lot. It can be emotional stress, financial stress, good stress, right? Known as eustress. You got a new job, you moved. But some people handle it differently. And that's going to be also important for figuring out what kind of adaptogen you need. I'm the kind of person that if I go like 2 nights without sleeping, and then I have one more stress that's added to my stress bucket, like I had a bad day. 9 out of 10 times, I'm getting sick. I used to get strep throat all the time. That was kind of always my thing. When I was traveling like every other week for work, when I finally stopped and got home, I would usually be so run down and I would get sick. So for me, something like Eleuthero, which we'll talk about, is going to be really important because my body responds to stress by decreasing my immune response. For some people, when they're stressed, their body goes into overdrive, and maybe this is where they can see flare-ups of things like autoimmune issues, or maybe their skin starts to break out really bad, or maybe their bowel movements get really affected, right? So you have to kind of figure out, what kind of stressor am I, and am I making myself worse right now, or am I responding appropriately, right? And so again, that's going to kind of determine what you're going to need for your adaptogen. So when we're kind of talking about more of the stimulating adaptogens, right? Maybe you are somebody who is just super burnt out. You're really fatigued. You've gone through some really mentally taxing stuff. You just feel like merp and blah, and you're just like, oh God, coffee doesn't help, and I don't know what else to do. Things like ginseng and rhodiola are going to be some of the most stimulating adaptogens, right? So particularly rhodiola can have a lot of benefits as well if you have like mental burnout, because there's a lot of cool research on the cognitive benefits. So the ginseng, rhodiolas, these are going to be a little bit more of the heavyweight champions when it comes to adaptogens on a sliding scale. Then we have some semi-stimulating adaptogens. So things like Eleuthero and cordyceps. You could maybe even put like reishi in here if you wanted, which that's a little bit more balancing. But again, these are things that are going to mildly stimulate. They're going to help with things like ATP production and have a restorative effect, particularly for things like the immune system. But again, it's not going to be overly stimulating, which we don't always want if you're a very type A person, if you have a lot of pitta energy, they would say in Ayurveda. If you have just like you're super hopped up on life, you don't always need to be more stimulated. You need to just come back into the now and be in more of a chill zone, not live off of cortisol, not live off of adrenaline, right? So Eleuthero cordyceps are going to be a little bit more semi-stimulating. And then we have our adaptogens that are going to be more balancing in nature. So again, these are super, super long-term relationship ones where you're probably going to want to be on these as your base, as your foundation, and then maybe even layer in some other things. Maybe you want to have some foundational balancing adaptogens and then throw in some stimulating ones as well because you are just so tired. So in here, you're going to see things like your ashwagandhas, your schizandra, holy basil, shatavari, gotukula, licorice, reishi, a lot of your other, medicinal mushrooms. Those are going to be your foundational balancing, most long-term tonics, right? And then as we continue down the scale, we have more calming and sedative botanicals that I've talked about in the past that maybe fall more so under the nervine category. So things like, milky oats and lemon balm, lavender, chamomile, and then even more heavy hitters are going to be things like, California poppy, kava, passion flower, and valerian. So that is kind of your sliding scale for what's going on with adaptogens and how you need to meet yourself where you are, figure out what kind of stress responder I am, and how am I going to respond accordingly. I did want to add one cool little side note about some of the neuroprotective benefits of some of these adaptogens, because again, we do know that when we're super stressed out, that we can feel the effects of it in our brain, right? So we have, decreased memory, we have brain fog, we maybe are just kind of feeling irrational and scatterbrained, right? So a lot of the bioactive compounds, the constituents that are found in adaptogens, they can help protect parts of the brain that are really vulnerable to cortisol-induced damage, because we do have cortisol receptors throughout the entire body, but we for sure have them in the brain. So particularly, they can be protective to parts of the brain like the hippocampus and the cerebral cortex. So the hippocampus, of course, deals with things like memories, and the cerebral cortex is, in charge of a lot of other things. And then again, even reducing oxidative damage to the neurons in our brain and stimulating concentrations of some of these antioxidant enzymes that are going to be really important for neutralizing free radical damage. So basically, they kind of are like the surveillance camera of your brain about being like, we don't want any more of this free radical damage, like get them out of here, right? And then can actually help to repair that. So they're protective in nature, particularly to parts of the brain like the hippocampus and the cerebral cortex. They can reduce some of that oxidative damage in the neurons particularly. And then some of them can even be stimulating in the sense where it can help with concentration, mood, and memory. Let's get into the next segment of the show, Botanical Bri. I am particularly excited for this Botanical Bri because the adaptogens that I am going to talk about, I think, are really nice for a lot of people. These are pretty mellow. They're really good foundational botanicals. They can be used long term. They're not overly stimulating. They're not overly sedative. They're really nice. So I want to take some time to talk about holy basil. I want to talk a little bit about Eleuthero, Rhodiola, and then finish off with ashwagandha because I think it can be used incorrectly sometimes. And we will even get into a little bit of a nerd alert on some specific compounds found in ashwagandha that have very cool research on things like immunity and the stress response. So let's get into holy basil first. Holy basil is actually known as Tulsi, and it is referred to as the queen of herbs. It is said to calm the mind and lift the spirit. Now, if we want to get super hippy-dippy, there is a lot of talk about holy basil in particular being able to reduce Kapha, which is one of the three main doshas that is in Ayurveda. And Kapha is one of the elements of earth and water, and the quality is heaviness and wetness and cold. And in Ayurveda, it corresponds to kind of the same experiences of feeling like a lot of heaviness, a lot of attachment to stuff. So it can mean or be implicated in things like depression. And so a lot of these depression-related symptoms that we see in Ayurveda are related to Kapha imbalances. So holy basil has been shown to reduce Kapha. If you're not into that and you want some more science, we also know that holy basil has really cool research, particularly in some of the polyphenols or the plant constituents such as ursolic acid and rosmarinic acid that have really nice, strong antioxidant properties. So really great for protecting against free radical damage. And there was even some research that was published in the Phytomedicine Journal that basically measured the activity of holy basil's phenylitic compounds, so the active constituents that are found in holy basil, against COX2 inhibitors. So these are things that people would take for things like inflammation related to moderate pain, fevers. And they found that the COX2 inhibitory activity of the compounds found in holy basil were comparable to ibuprofen and aspirin. So again, because it can actually work on the same pathways in the body and the enzymes in particular that modulate inflammation. So it's really nice for encouraging emotional well-being. It can lower cortisol levels. Very good for counteracting stress-induced changes that can impact neurotransmitters and enzymes in particular. So it can help to regulate things like cortisol and epinephrine and dopamine. So again, really good for if stress is kind of affecting your mood, right? And so that can influence your cortisol and you feel kind of jacked up and you kind of just can't get your head straight. And again, because holy basil is an aromatic herb, it is said to be very clearing and dispersing. So kind of like how the sun can break through on a cloudy day and, maybe you have those days where you feel like mentally cloudy. Holy basil is really nice for kind of clearing up the clouds, if you will, the emotional mental clouds, and clearing up that fog and helping that fade away. So holy basil is really, really nice for that. Next, we have Eleuthero, which is one of my favorites. It's been very helpful for me, particularly because when I experience stress, like I said earlier, I get sick, like effective immediately. So a Eleuthero person, as they would say in Chinese medicine, is very good for somebody who has compromised immunity that goes along with being fatigued. because Eleuthero is really nice at increasing lymphocyte count as well as T cell activation, it is very good for immune enhancement. So Eleuthero, again, is that kind of person who is just like, you go hard and like endurance everything in your life, right? Like everything is like go, go, go all the time. And then kind of when you hit a wall, it's just totally crushing to the body. Eleuthero is nice again because it's not superheating. So if you are that person who's like go, go, go all the time, but you're super fatigued from it, you don't necessarily want something that's going to make you go, 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 right? You kind of need to, again, be sort of where you are and sort of get back to a place of balance and homeostasis. So Eleuthero is a little bit less stimulating in that fact than a true ginseng. So again, really good for that person who gets a lot of stress. They want to avoid that kind of burnout and fatigue. And if they get immune issues, immune compromised because of stress. So very good for that passion, fire kind of person. You're very pitta in nature, right? You're very like revved up on life. Where maybe if you took another ginseng, another form of ginseng like Panax or American ginseng, it could maybe be overstimulating for you. Again, because Eleuthero is not a true ginseng. It's one of the only non-heating ginsengs that we have. And again, it can support the immune system by increasing T cells. Again, very good for people who, when they get stressed out, they get sick, can support endurance. And again, it's one of these long-term tonics. Now let's take some time to get into rhodiola because this is a really great adaptogen and very, very amazing for enhancing physical performance, very good at reducing the effects of, prolonged physical and mental fatigue, right? So that person who is super stressed and burnt out, maybe you're just kind of like feeling just like totally wiped out, right? And then also for that person who, when you're super stressed out and feeling low and kind of, on the downswing of things, your mood gets super affected. Like you just get really, really moody. So rhodiola has really great research on being able to actually stimulate things like dopamine and serotonin in the cerebral cortex, in the brainstem and the hypothalamus. So it can increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier to some of the precursors of dopamine and serotonin as well, which can support not only cognitive function, but also mood. So very good, again, for that person when you are stressed out, you're just like bitch Brianna mode and everybody around you is getting impacted by that. There's a lot of really nice antioxidants in rhodiola, particular rosavins, right, which have been shown to have these neuroprotective benefits to the brain and some of these other protective benefits that can happen if we are having damaging secondary effects of cortisol. Really good, again, if you're that person who maybe has, stress-induced eating. There was some really cool research on reducing stress-induced binge eating in female rats with rhodiola. And the history with rhodiola has been there for such a long time. I mean, they used to use it in Russian and Scandinavian medicinal worlds to help with things like physical endurance and longevity, resistance to altitude sickness, for any kind of fatigue, poor mood, nervous system disorders. So again, it's really good at helping you stay in that kind of long-term dealing with the grind of life every day. And again, very good for increasing serotonin levels, reducing some of those stress hormones, and working on dopamine levels as well. Lastly, we are going to talk about ashwagandha, which is really amazing because it has such a great history in Ayurveda in particular, but it's one of the first adaptogens that I ever really got not only involved in from a research standpoint, but helped me individually when I was going through a really stressed out, burnt out time when I was in graduate school and just could not get it together. I mean, I was working out so much because that was my stress relief. I was so stressed because I was in graduate school. It's just a lot, right? So ashwagandha for me at that time was really helpful. I don't necessarily use it as much now because I have other, things like I was talking about before, Eleuthero, that have been beneficial for me. But ashwagandha classifies as something called a rasana in Ayurveda, which means that it's very, very deeply regenerative and promotes longevity in the body. And so it can help to rejuvenate not only the brain, but also the nervous system, particularly because it can promote GABA-like activity in the brain. So this is why it actually makes it kind of a little bit more relaxing. There's also cool research on ashwagandha for hormone and reproductive health and libido. It's been shown to improve sperm count and motility and even serum testosterone levels in men. I do like to let people know, though, because some people have adverse reactions to ashwagandha, much like some people have adverse reactions to valerian, where it kind of has the opposite effect. So because ashwagandha can be a little bit more warming in nature, it can be a little bit more stimulating on kind of that scale. There's a small percentage of people who experience the stimulatory effects more so when they take ashwagandha. Some people take ashwagandha before they go to bed because it can help with sleep, and we'll talk about that in a second. But again, if you're a very pitta constitution, as they would say in Ayurveda, you have a lot of like heat in the body, maybe liver issues, anger, very strong emotions, you might be more sensitive to some of the heating properties that ashwagandha has. So it might not be the adaptogen for you, even though there's great research on it. But again, ashwagandha is very nice for that person who would be like a ginseng person, right? You're burnt out, you're tired, you're fatigued, but it's not heating, it's not as yang, it's not as stimulating like a Panax ginseng would be. Really great to use it preventatively, right? If you put out a lot more energy than you put into your cells and you're looking to kind of avoid burnout, right? So really good for that kind of constitutional type. It can be used in sort of this restorative way, again, for people who need just more emotional well-being support. It's not necessarily like a central nervous system sedative, right? So it's not going to knock you out, but it's not going to aggravate that hyped up type A super spaz person like a ginseng would. And it has a really broad application. In Ayurveda, they also say that ashwagandha is really good for all three doshas, right? So it can kind of have this broad effect as well, but it's kind of this multi-purpose adaptogen in the body. It can help with healthy moods. Again, very good as a long-term tonic. It's considered to be a grounding herb, which means that it helps to nourish and regulate metabolic processes in the body and help to stabilize mood. So very, very good for increasing resistance to your physical, mental, environmental stressors. The term ashwagandha actually means horse smell, which pays homage to the potency that the herb has on those that take it, right? Because if you ever smell ashwagandha, it's got like this really thick, aggressive smell because it's supposed to give you the vigor of what a horse would have, right? Like the strength of a horse and the vigor and all of that. But what's interesting is that because it is an adaptogen, depending on where you fall with your own issues and health stuff, it can be used for some people who feel super anxious and overstimulated, wired, and tired, right? But it's also very good for that exhausted, burnt out person. It's mildly sedative. And again, the species name Withannia somnifera, so the part somnifera, refers to its use to support sleep. And somnifera actually means sleep inducer in Latin. So if you take it over time, it can help to restore the nervous system. It is sweet and mildly bitter in nature, and it's a little bit warming. So you'll see in a lot of Ayurvedic traditions, ashwagandha is taken as a powder and they mix it into milk and they take it before bedtime, which is really nice. And finally, for the last segment of your show, we are going to finish with Nerd Alert. Nerd Alert. So researchers have identified more than 35 different chemical constituents in the roots of ashwagandha. And so there's this group of active compounds known as Withanolides. And this is where there's a lot of really great health promoting benefits, particularly for the immune system. So Withanolides are the kind of like family, if you will. And then from there, we sort of have a subgroup. So Withaferin A has been one of these isolated withanolides that has been studied in ashwagandha to support not only healthy inflammatory pathways in the body and the stress response, but this is the part that has a lot of the immunoregulatory, immunomodulating properties by being able to prevent white blood cell depletion. So it can keep white blood cells in the body still, and it can activate lymphocytes. And ashwagandha is really nice for helping to modulate immune system, right? So it's not going to overexcite the immune system if that is somebody who maybe is implicated for, autoimmune issues as well. And again, there's actually some pretty cool research about ashwagandha having an affinity to help people who have chronic neuromuscular disorders. So things like fibromyalgia and MS, again, for those that are stress implicated. So if they're noticing things like fibromyalgia maybe gets a flare up when they have times of stress, an adaptogen like ashwagandha could be very beneficial. Withanolides A also has been shown to inhibit NF-kappa B, which is one of these proteins that controls cytokine production in the body, plays a role in the inflammatory process, and is a part of the innate immune system. So again, ashwagandha, it's a really nice grounding herb. It's very nourishing. It can help to stabilize and regulate things. And adaptogens in general are really nice for helping you adapt to what life is throwing at you. So I hope y'all find an adaptogen in here that resonated with you. Play around with some, try a couple of out, give it 3 to 6 months if you can. And I hope y'all enjoy listening to the podcast. Ciao. Ba-da-da-da-da-da.